All right, welcome back. Today we're going to continue talking about the Middle Ages. So today we'll talk about popes versus kings. We'll also talk about the Crusades. So make sure you know what the Crusades are by the end of the lesson. Here we go. Course objectives are: who is the Pope? He is the leader of the Catholic Church. Okay, at this time, there really is only one church. It hasn't split. What's going to happen is the Catholic Church is going to split into the Eastern Orthodox and then the Catholic Church. You'll have a split. Then the Catholic Church itself will split into Catholics and Protestants. Then Protestants will split, and then those will split, and so on and so forth until you have a plethora of denominations like we have today. How many crusades are there? Your book has 4, so there's 4. But there's actually more, and it depends on what you define as a crusade. I think there's 9 considered crusades. And then what's the goal of the crusade? You need to know that. We'll talk about it in a minute. Quick review. Feudal system. First off, let's fill in the little bubbles. Who's at the top of the feudal system? Right, kings and queens before and below them. Okay, lords below them, knights, very good. And who's at the bottom of the feudal system? If you said peasants or serfs, you got that right. Good job. Okay, hold on. Very good, very good. What's it called if you are the lower person on the totem pole? You have to be subservient. Vassal. Remember that vocab word? Very good. Okay. The green lines over there. What are the green lines? What do each one of these give the lower person on the totem pole? You expect what? Land. Okay, very good. Land. Good job.
You have chosen wisely.
Okay, so basically the kings give land to the nobles give land to the knights, and what do you expect in return for that land? How can you sum that up? Work. Okay, we'll call it work. If you're a knight, you're going to provide protection. If you're a peasant or a serf, you're going to provide labor. That is the feudal system. Okay, good job. Let's see here. What do we got? Here we go. Pope versus king. Pope is the head of the Catholic Church. There's going to be a dispute about power and about bishops. You don't necessarily need to get into that, but they're going to split. And the church in Constantinople will be known as the Eastern Orthodox Church. That exists still till this day. And then the Christian Catholic Church is going to be in Rome. And that's also till this day. I mean, technically it's called Vatican City, but it's still there in Italy. The Pope is seen as a representative of God on earth. Okay, vocab word, excommunicate. This means you are kicked out of the church. If the Pope says, I excommunicate you, you are no longer part of the church. And what does that mean for, for this? What are the religious consequences if you're excommunicated? Okay, you're kicked out of heaven, basically. Does that make sense? If you believe that the Pope is God's representative and the Pope is kicking you out of the team, then that's what, does that make sense? Okay, this has dramatic and, dramatic effects on people. So you have your kings and they're in England and France. By the way, who's the king that comes over from France? He was the Duke of Normandy. He comes over to England from France and he wins at the Battle of Hastings. Which king was that? Do you remember? William the Conqueror. Okay, don't forget all this stuff. It's okay. You need to learn it some more. That's fine too. Okay, no worries. Dynastic rule just means you're having a dynasty. Your son, could be your daughter, but usually your son is going to inherit the throne. Okay. Both King Henry IV and Gregory VII want to have the power to appoint the bishops. The Pope says, I excommunicate you. So as the story goes, King Henry waits in the snow for 3 days. And what you're seeing here, this image is him, I guess, his feet are getting frostbitten or something. Waits in the snow for 3 days to sort of apologize to the Pope. Here's a fun video about this.
In the Middle Ages, the king thought he was in charge of the church, and the pope thought he could crown kings. I should rule over church leaders. Well, I should be able to crown kings. I'm king. I should be at a higher rank than you. You wouldn't be here if I hadn't crowned you. Well, you wouldn't be here unless I hired you. Well, you're stupid. No, you're stupid. Get over it! Pope Gregory VII ordered that kings could not interfere in church matters. I, the Pope, now pronounce that kings cannot interfere in church matters, and also that I'm much cooler than King Henry IV. King Henry IV was angry because he had always appointed bishops, and he needed them to support him. Aw, come on, Pope, that was uncalled for. King Henry IV said Pope Gregory VII was no longer Pope, and Pope Gregory VII said King Henry IV was no longer king. That's it, I'm sick of you. Me too. You're fired. Jinx, under a roof. Dang it! Gregory excommunicated Henry, which meant he had to leave the church and could no longer be accepted into heaven. I hereby banish you. What? You heard me. Ow. But, no buts. Leave. Okay, fine. Henry went to Gregory's castle barefoot in the snow to ask for forgiveness. Hey bro, I'm sorry. I can't let you in. Aw, why? Because you're a meanie. Aw, come on. Okay, fine. The Pope and the King signed the Concordat of Worms. This agreement said that only the Pope could appoint bishops, and only kings could appoint nobles. Now that we have both signed the Concordat of Worms, it will bring us peace to our country. For only a couple of years, and then we'll probably get into some sort of war. I'm glad we can agree on something, but I still think it was a stupid idea to call it Concordat of Worms.
Alright, welcome back. So now we're going to talk about the Crusades. And first off, look at this map. You can see where are all these crusades, where are they all going to take place at? What is going to be the goal of the crusades? Can you tell from this map? Okay, so the goal of the crusades is to recapture the Holy Land, okay? As the story goes, the Muslims were, first off, let me ask you before I just tell you, before the Crusades, the Muslims control a vast amount of land, many different groups involved in this land, many different, peoples. Do they let them practice their religion? In general, yes, but what do they want? A tax. Remember that? Remember they taxed other religions? Okay. Well, there's going to be some new a new Muslim empire, the Seljuk Turks, and they're going to say, you can't come into these holy cities. You can't come into Jerusalem specifically. And the rest of Europe is shocked by this, and they're going to feel like it's a moral duty to go reclaim this land for Christendom. Okay? So Pope Urban II says, Christians, mount up, all knights are called, go down there and reclaim this land. And that is what the Crusades are. So what is the goal of the Crusades? Okay, the goal of the Crusades is to reclaim the Holy Land. Does that make sense?
The Crusades were military campaigns waged by Western European Christians during the Middle Ages for the defense and expansion of Christendom. What made a crusade distinct was that warriors involved in the fighting received spiritual merit, usually a plenary indulgence granted by the Pope. A crusade was considered by Western European Christians to be a holy act, an act of sacrifice and piety for the love of Christ. 4 centuries before the beginning of the Crusades, the first Muslim armies swept out of Arabia to conquer Palestine, Syria, Mesopotamia, Egypt, North Africa, and Spain, some 2/3 of the Christian world. Between the 7th and 11th centuries, Christians fought wars against Muslims to prevent them from making further conquests into Christian territory. In Spain, Christian kingdoms waged wars to recapture their homeland from the Arabs, while the Byzantine Empire in the east was engaged in centuries of war with the Muslims for control of Anatolia and other regions. In the 11th century, the Seljuk Turks, recent converts to Islam, swept through Syria and Palestine. In 1071, they defeated the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert, conquering almost all of Anatolia. In response, Pope Urban II called the First Crusade, asking knights from all over Europe to band together and push back the Seljuks. Over the 12th and 13th centuries, the popes called more crusades to the Holy Land and also called for crusades in Spain to help push back the Muslim powers. Crusades against Muslims were not called with the intention of converting them to Christianity. Rather, they were called to regain control of territory that had been previously Christian but had fallen to Muslim armies. Jerusalem had been conquered by the Muslims in 637 and was considered particularly important to Western Christians since it was the site of Christ's crucifixion. Indeed, Jerusalem was revered as the holiest site in the Christian cosmos, and it was particularly important to Western Europeans that it be brought again under Christian rule. When in the 11th century, news arrived that Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem were being harassed and killed by the Seljuk Turks, this fact alone inspired many knights to join the First Crusade. Although the Crusades were called to reclaim lands, greed was not a primary motivation. Professor Jonathan Riley Smith, the world's foremost expert on Crusades history, has proven that crusading was incredibly dangerous and expensive, and that virtually none of the knights who went could expect to gain wealth. Indeed, they often bankrupted themselves crusading. The primary motivation for crusading was spiritual, with the knights joining because they believed that they were doing God's work by fighting to protect Christian pilgrims and to reclaim holy sites like Jerusalem, and that involving themselves in a crusade would win them spiritual merit. The Crusades to the Holy Land saw many failures but also many successes. The First Crusade and the Third Crusade, for example, were both very successful, though ultimately later, at the close of the 13th century, the last Crusader holdings in Syria and Palestine would be captured by the Muslim Mamluk Empire. However, the Crusades in Spain achieved lasting victory, with the whole of Spain being ultimately recaptured by the Christians. Later Crusades would also be called against the Ottoman Turks, such as the Crusade of Lepanto in 1571.
Excellent. Here's an image. I like this one because it came out right. Cool. Here's another image. For some reason, it didn't translate onto the video properly, but there you go. Here's the map again. You can see Jerusalem's down here, and the goal is going to be to come on down here and capture the Holy Land. Very good. Okay, First Crusade. The First Crusade. They go down and they capture the Holy Land and they hold it for 50 years. Here's a little twist though. It's not just Christians versus Muslims. They're going to attack Jewish people and say, hey, you killed Jesus. Pretty crazy, right? But that's what happened. The Second Crusade, your book talks about this German king that died. Okay, imagine you're wearing armor, especially a king's armor. Okay, very shiny, could be very heavy. He falls into a river. It's not even that deep where he falls into, but he can't swim because he's got all this armor on. He drowns. Okay. I think what I want you to get from this is that these battles are prolonged. You look at these dates; they're decades apart. Even when you hold it for 50 years, I mean, that's for a long time. This thing takes place over 100 years. And so when you see, you might hear on the news, it's a new crusade, something going on in the Middle East, between Europe and the Middle East. It's a new crusade. I just want you to see that these two power entities have been struggling against each other for centuries, okay? Third Crusade, you get Richard the Lionheart versus Saladin. These are both important military leaders for their respective groups. Okay, Richard the Lionheart, obviously he gets this nickname because he's brave. Saladin is a great military commander that shows compassion even to his enemies or respect for his enemies. And so they clash. Richard the Lionheart does not capture Jerusalem. Let's talk about the Crusades in general. Before I give you the answers, why will the Europeans, why will the Crusaders be at a disadvantage? Before I even tell you the answer, think about it for just a minute.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
Okay, very good. Go real quick and look at this map. Okay, home field advantage. You've got to bring in just the logistics. You've got to bring in all your horses, all your weapons, all your food. You're the army on the move. So therefore, you're not going to have the home field advantage, right? Does that make sense? Okay. What's the climate? You're coming down there in that armor to fight in the Arabian desert-y climate. Okay, it's going to be hot. It's going to be hard to fight in. Again, you have the home field advantage. You're going to be outnumbered. And then, we had talked about the church splitting. There's splits within the leadership. There's different kings. There's different there's different countries representative. And therefore, you're not going to have a unified leadership. Does this make sense? Okay, very good. That's it for today. You got a quick quiz on this tomorrow. And we got a film coming up on the Crusades. I hope you have a great day. Take care.